All right, as folks are logging in here, it's just super fun to see so many familiar names, everybody. Josh, greetings, nice to see you. I saw Bob here, but Bob, you and Van, I think, are tied for having attended the most of these interactive dialogues, so thank you again for your participation, as always, and mentorship within the firm. Jim, good to see you. Morgan's here, greetings. All right, as people are logging in, very fun. Good morning, everybody. Okay, terrific. Well, as we're kind of hitting some critical mass here, George, you ready to get rolling here?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, fantastic. Welcome everybody to this edition of the Interactive Dialogue, which is part of our food, beverages, and agribusiness industry group's efforts to get information out to our client base on various issues that are happening within our industry. This segment, I'd say in particular, is we're kicking off a three-part series on merger and acquisition activity with a true expert, George Sent, who will introduce himself in a moment. This program is, I think, particularly something that would be valuable for everybody in every industry, all of our clients, regardless of whether you're in food, beverages, agribusiness, medical technology, et cetera. Best practices on pre-sale preparation is an important topic. And so I'm really excited to be here with you, George. A couple of just introductory notes. The webinar is qualified for CLE. The materials and also the CLE sign-in was sent to you yesterday in the afternoon. And so all of these information, all the information that George and I are going to discuss here this morning, you already have an email link to that. And I really encourage you to use that. This presentation in particular, we put a little bit more text, frankly, than typically I want to see in an interactive dialogue, but we did that for a very specific reason, and that is that some of the information that's contained here can be used as a kind of checklist of sorts, and so I really do recommend that you pull down the PowerPoint and use it as a checklist. For those who have not participated in interactive dialogues before, this is intended to be a discussion format, really more like a mixture between a legal CLE and talk radio with an expert, where we take a topic and try and explore it with the types of questions that people have. And so I'm playing a bit the role of you, all the participants, in that I've got a lot of questions for George based on materials that he mostly put together, although I did add some things as I'll describe. And then I'll be asking some of the kind of practical issues that happen with regards to the topic that we're discussing. But if you have specific questions, there is a chat pane at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. You'll see a little chat button, and you can ask us questions. I'll be monitoring that, and we'll either respond to you in the chat window, or we'll weave your questions into the questions that I'll be asking George. If you'd like to have them be anonymous, then please just make some comment there that, keep it anonymous as to who you are. Otherwise, I might use a name. I usually use first name, so it's pretty anonymous in that regard anyway, especially if you're a Mike or a George, right, George?
Correct.
Lots of us around. And then today, this program I thought was interesting in particular, as we'll talk about, because even if you're not looking at a pre-sale situation, I think, George, that the recommendations that you've made are really just good business. And so I'll be asking you some questions along those lines. I reflect on the fact that as outside providers to businesses, we have a unique sampling, really, of the way that many different people and organizations have tried to approach a particular topic. And as a result of that, we kind of get a unique case study view, I guess, on what happens within business. So for me, my perspective, I'm a partner in the food, beverages, and agribusiness group at Dorsey and Whitney. Dorsey is about a 650 attorney firm. We're headquartered in Minneapolis, although as you can see through the background here, I am in not very sunny Seattle. and I work primarily on the West Coast for food, beverages, and cooperatives in the industry. George, can you give a brief background on yourself, but then also Cascadia and the work that your industry group does?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Mike. And great to be with you and with the firm again in another session here. So by background, I've been in the food, beverage, agriculture space for about 20 years. I was a CPA consultant and advisor by background, then went in-house where I worked at the Smucker Company in my early 30s and ran corporate finance and investor relations, and just had a tremendous experience working with that company. I worked with Tim and Richard Smucker, who were fourth generation family owners or family members, CEOs of the public company, and just got a tremendous education in the food and beverage space. Came back into the service industry about 15 years ago after working at Smucker, because I really missed working with clients in the dynamic nature of working on different types of client situations. And I've been an investment banker to the space for the last 15 years at different firms, namely B of A, Lazard. My wife and I moved back to our hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, and I was with KeyBank up until joining Cascadia 3 years ago. I just hit a 3-year anniversary, and I'm a senior member of the Cascadia group. By background, we are a, call it 60-person firm headquartered in Seattle, so significant presence in the Pacific Northwest, but we have a national practice. And again, I sit in Ohio, where we are working with clients throughout the nation in different categories throughout the food, beverage, agriculture spectrum. We worked on, just for some perspective, we worked on 14 transactions in food, beverage, and agriculture in 2019. We did about 9 or 10 M&A transactions last year with COVID, even as a headwind. And so we're a very active group in these various segments of food, beverage, and agriculture. So pleasure to be with you. As you said, we'll talk about our space today, but I think a lot of the comments can relate to any industry and any business owner that's thinking about a transaction, in the near term.
Terrific. So a little bit about kind of what our objective is in the presentation. I couldn't help myself but to include a quote from my favorite book, business book anyway, the 7 Habits book, which I've read 8 times. I figured I need to read it at least one time more than each habit. Still working on them. But in any event, one of the key ones is to begin with the end in mind, which I thought was such a paradigm for what we're talking about here, because really the concept of discussing pre-sale preparation is really begin with the end in mind, which is maximizing the value of the business, which of course is important when you're selling, but also important when you're just running the business and keeping track of all the myriad things and challenges that one might have. So can you talk a little bit, your first comment here was discuss the timing for readiness, and what do you mean by readiness? What does that term signify?
Yeah, by background, I spent a lot of time in my youth playing sports, and also my family was involved in the construction business. And so I learned early days to measure twice and cut once. I'm a big believer in preparing before you're actually engaged in the conversation. And so we think that there is a readiness path and steps that one would take in order to be prepared for the conversation with buyers. And we'll go through those today, but you certainly don't benefit from having a discussion with a buyer where you're on stage and you haven't given some thought to what the business looks like, how the team will interact with the buyer, whether the financials are ready, et cetera. And again, we'll go through each of those, areas. But we think it's such an important part of, the life cycle of a company to get to that point where you're selling your life's work, that it takes a lot of um, preparation to be able to do so.
Then do you find that more so in the case of food, beverages, and agribusiness business sales, or is it different in any way across industries that you've observed?
I would say the details and the specifics that we look for in preparing a food, beverage, agribusiness are different. A lot of the comments and advice that we'll give today are general enough that they would apply to an industrials business or a healthcare business, but there are definitely some nuances, Mike, to the process for a food, beverage, and agri company, and the things that you would look for and the areas that you want to focus on specifically for preparation.
And just in general, what are the other industry sectors that you and your colleagues are seeing that are really hot right now?
Yeah, so, and this is, we're seeing this in the public markets. Technology was very active during COVID as there were businesses, be it software or what have you, that were focused on efficiencies. I mean, think about Zoom. A year and a half ago, we weren't using Zoom for every interaction that we had throughout the day. So technology certainly has been very active over the last, I'll call it 18 months. Healthcare, certainly, again, COVID has accelerated some of the interest in healthcare and telemedicine and some of the other advents in healthcare, but that's been an active space for a long time. Industrials, I would say across the board, Mike, we as a firm are busier than we ever have been. Without getting into too many specifics, we expect, our deal volume to be up at least another 50% from the level we were at last year. Last year was a little depressed versus 2019, but we are just seeing tremendous activity across all the sectors that we cover.
And in regards to food and beverages and agribusiness, does that kind of increase in other sectors mean that there's less money available or more competition for the investment dollar in this sector?
I would say that food is very resilient. I think that within food, we've seen some shift in activity. For example, if you consider restaurants food-like, folks were not going to restaurants. So there was investment from firms that were focused on the restaurant and food space that shifted into the food area that we're in, right, at home food. But I think food is a safe area for investors, right? It grows at a nice moderate rate. It's stable, and it will continue, right, with population growth. So we continue to see food as being really resilient throughout COVID and certainly here into 2021.
And it seems like the growth factors are things that businesses have experienced over time, so you kind of know what the trajectory looks like, which may be attractive to some investors, not attractive to others, right?
Exactly. It's fairly predictable. Now, within the food complex, there are certainly areas that are more high technology or areas that are maybe lower growth. So there is certainly a spectrum, but in general, it's a fairly stable, predictable area of investment.
And as we knock on wood, hopefully are seeing the light at the end of the COVID tunnel, or at least a light that represents a different tunnel. Do you anticipate anything kind of changing in regards to investment activity because of that?
Yeah, a few factors that we see, and we say the markets are extremely active. Again, we see investment dollars, and even from the strategics, the large companies in the space, in interest in growing through acquisitions. And again, we think of a couple buckets of investors. There are private equity groups, and then there are the large strategics or companies, both extremely active. We see the potential tax change, which seems pretty imminent, as being a catalyst for activity. So I say $3 in 2021 equals $4 next year. We think, and there are several articles out there by Forbes and Fortune and others that predict that there's probably a 20 to 30% change in the tax rate for a business owner. So if you receive $3 today for your business, and that may be followed by a couple zeros, that is worth $4 next year. And so that's an important consideration for our clients. And I should have said, we work with mostly business owners, entrepreneurs and family-owned businesses. And so a lot of those folks are saying, if I'm going to sell in the next few years, I may just consider pulling that forward to today, and let's try to close the transaction by year end, because I want to avoid those incremental taxes. We see this notion of, and this lines up with some of the demographics of our clients, folks that survived the Great Recession. And let's say you were in your 50s, call it 10 or so years ago during the recession. If you just survived this COVID period and you were able to make it through the last 12 months, a lot of folks are fatigued and they're saying, I'm now in my 60s. I've survived these two major exogenous, events. It's time to sell, and we're ready to move on.
I remember having a conversation with Michael Butler, one of your colleagues. It was probably 7-8 months ago now, and I remember reflecting on that comment, that if you've had these two existential threats to your business that you've lived through, and you look around and you think, okay, so what's my personal runway? If you're a business owner in your 60s, or in some cases a senior executive, and looking at transition planning, which is part of the, one of the critical jobs of business owners, is looking at their own succession plan, and thinking, boy, do I have another run? Do I want to go through that? And so this was before the idea of the tax implications. And, I've heard several businesses, I want to kind of go back to that for just a moment. I've had several businesses comment on their concern about a capital gains tax increase. And I was thinking that there's a certain point where the fear of the change is as important as the likelihood of the change, that people are concerned it's going to happen, so they're going to take actions based on that. And if it doesn't play out, then your $3 in 2021 was $3 in 2021, just not $3 in 2022, or whatever. And so, but the fear of it ends up being a little bit self-fulfilling, I guess. Is that a fair comment?
I think that's true. I think, like anything, there's a confluence of a couple of these topics, right? We talked about demographics. We talked about the potential tax change. We're seeing multiples that are higher than they ever have been in the food and beverage space, agriculture space. I always say that businesses are selling for 2 to 3 turns higher than maybe you would have seen historically for each of the categories. So, to break, or to describe that in layman's terms, if a business is measured by this financial term we call EBITDA, and most food businesses were selling at, call it 6 to 8 times EBITDA, in the past or historically, they're now selling for 8 to 10 times. And so I think that's a major factor as well. There are the taxes, but also this extreme activity and assets selling at much higher values than they have over the last 5-10 years.
Another thing I've been struck at is kind of new entrants to the capital markets of businesses, in some cases people that you wouldn't have expected. We've had large teacher union pension funds buying up land. Just read an article that Bill Gates is the #1 agricultural landowner in the United States, just ahead of the Offutt family. Yeah. And what are you experiencing in that respect?
Oh, for sure. It is, especially in the agro part of our business. We are seeing endowments, pension funds, to your point, wealthy individuals, family offices that are very interested in agriculture. I think as a long-term movement, they recognize that food will be in demand forever. It will grow at 3 to 5% or something that is similar to a GDP rate. And it will continue to be a scarce resource. business land on which agriculture is grown. And that's actually impacting other parts of our business. So we're seeing these funds also creep into or look at our ingredient businesses and other things, other parts of the business that are further up the value chain.
You mentioned that we live in the information age. How does that impact the curiosity of business owners?
Yeah, I think that a business owner today is far more equipped in what mergers and acquisitions look like. You can go on to Google and you can Google M&A steps, and you can probably find a lot of the topics that we're going to be talking about today. I think that can be dangerous. I think, conflating, understanding bullet points versus actually having the expertise of executing a merger or an acquisition, of having, some of the battle scars that you and I both have in running transactions, I think is a different experience. But certainly business owners are far more educated on what it takes to sell their business than they ever have been. And I think that curiosity also has led to a lot of folks, raising their hands and saying they're interested in selling as well.
So for those of you who can see me on screen, we're having that rarest of moments. In Seattle, it's called a sun break. It's when this big yellow thing appears in the sky. So in any event, I apologize for that. All right, so from my perspective, why I wanted to pick this topic is that the old saying of proper planning prevents pathetically poor performance. There's actually a different word for pathetically that is sometimes used. And so can you talk a little bit about what the process is, in particular the merger and acquisition? You mentioned it's a 6 to 9 month time frame, which I think sometimes surprises people in how long it is to some degree. Can you talk about what that timing means and kind of when does it start?
Sure. So we describe the process as 6 to 9 months. Of that timeline, Mike, I would say you're engaged with buyers for about 4 to 5 months, maybe 3 to 4 months of that time period. Some of that 6 to 9 months is doing some market preparation, putting together materials. If you were selling a home, you would engage a real estate agent. They would come to your home, they would take pictures, they would do the proper marketing to be able to list your home and to show it in the best light. And for us, it's and I hate comparing it to a real estate transaction, but it's a similar process in that we want to make sure that we present the business in its best light. And so we spend about a month or two preparing the company, putting together marketing materials, telling the story. If there are good or bad elements to the company's story or the founder's story, we want to make sure to highlight those. Even the bad elements, I'm a big believer in being very transparent and hitting issues head on. Working with attorneys like yourself to make sure that we're battle ready. We have a purchase agreement ready, and we've gone through the proper legal diligence before we get out into the market and have conversations with buyers. Because again, I feel like you need to understand every element of the story before you're actually being, tested by a buyer.
I'm so glad you used the analogy to selling a home, because it's the one I use, and I always feel like it's so simplistic, but yet at the same time, you have a pre-inspection done, you have the binder open on the table for people to look at as they're walking through, you paint the interior or exterior, et cetera, you fix problems, that someone's gonna ask about, so you may as well get it done, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
so I love that you also use that analogy.
Yeah, it's very relatable, and I would say similarly, going back to why do you hire a banker or hire a very good M&A attorney, somebody who is not just your trust and estate attorney, but somebody that's actually gone through the M&A process. You do so because they have that expertise, right? They're not selling the home for the first time. You're going to hire somebody who's experienced at positioning the story. And each of these segments of food and beverage have their own nuances. we happen to be very good at the ingredient space, for example, and having sold 5 ingredient deals in the last 18 months, we know the good qualities and the qualities that we'll de-emphasize in a sale process.
It's a question that we often get. Most of the clients that I work with have another lawyer that they work with regularly. So there's somebody who drafts contracts and handles, disputes with members if it's a co-op or the like. But then often we're brought in for certain kinds of things. You need someone who has an office in Hong Kong or access to someone who's truly an antitrust expert and the like. When you're talking to particularly the food and beverages clients, why would they not want to hire or look beyond the pool of experts that they're typically working with? So that's obviously, there's a little, honestly, self-interest here from the lawyer perspective, but the same is true for their accounting firm that they deal with regularly. They may have some environmental work done here and there from somebody. Can you walk through that?
Yeah, I will support your comment. I think a trusted M&A attorney is worth their weight in gold, and we always recommend our clients not work with the buddy who helped set up the trust and estate plan or helped with the contract work, as they were building their business. And often our clients will have that trusted advisor, that person they could turn to for every legal matter that came up early in the business, right? And that's a very important person to have around as you're creating a company. But that expertise is different than the mergers and acquisitions expertise. And so I will support your comment about hiring somebody like Dorsey and you specifically, who knows, again, the nuances of the contract development and has negotiated a purchase agreement and knows what's market, right? It has done enough transactions that they know, for example, I'll use jargon for a second, but they know what rep and warranty insurance is and what is market in that part of the process or the transaction. And so, we list some of the pre-sale preparation folks that we would reach out to here. The first is the right attorney that's well-versed in M&A, the right accounting firm that can help with a quality of earnings. And that I always call that sort of a mini audit. I was an auditor earlier on in my career, so I can say this affectionately. You hire somebody every year to go through an audit process, and that's an important step. A quality of earnings is sort of a certification of the numbers right before a transaction happens. And that includes some analysis of things like potential add backs to EBITDA. And we think it's important, again, back to this notion of measuring twice and cutting once, build a proper forecast for the business. Where's the company going over the next, 3 to 5 years? And frankly, making sure that your team internally, you've created maybe a good external team and you've gotten that set, making sure that your internal team is ready, because going through a 6 to 9 month process for M&A is intense, and you have to make sure that your team is ready, frankly, to endure that, that 6 to 9 months. They're managing their day-to-day process, their day-to-day jobs, but then they're also working on an M&A process that, can take 20, 30, 40 hours a week as well.
It's literally like having a second secret job where, you're doing it evenings and weekends because you can't let people see what you're doing, et cetera. It's more of an impact, I think, than board members typically recognize on the management team. One other comment before we leave this slide, and it kind of goes to the quality of earnings assessment. I'll comment and then a question, then we'll go to the next slide. So my comment is that, one of the things to be thinking about as you're doing that audit is the potential for kind of conflicts of interest, and I don't mean that in the sense of a direct conflict necessarily, but more someone who's really coming in and and doing a fresh assessment. And that could be from your existing accounting firm, but a different partner who's coming in and really doing that assessment. Same true, obviously, for lawyers as well. As someone who is not representing everybody in a market or in a region is beneficial because you have someone who's truly kind of on your side. And then my question, as we launch into the next slide, can you talk a little bit about what an add back is and how that plays out in this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll describe it and then I'll give you an example, a couple examples. So add backs back to this notion of the financial metric EBITDA, which is basically operating income plus depreciation and amortization. So it's pretty easy to find on an income statement and the balance sheet cash flow statement for the depreciation and amortization. So there are add backs to EBITDA, like, for example, an employee or an owner's compensation that's above market. Some of our clients, believe it or not, will pay themselves very richly to maybe avoid having income that they're paying, taxes on. So they're paying themselves $1 million a year. It can be identified that a standard rate for a CEO or an owner's, $500,000 or $300,000. And so that incremental compensation could be considered an add back to EBITDA. It's an amount that may not continue on with the business if it was under new ownership. We also saw a lot of add backs for COVID over this last year. And you and I have clients that, are going through this. They sold to the food service industry. The restaurants and quick service restaurants were shut down. So temporarily, parts of their business were impaired or hampered by COVID. And so that could be considered a one-time adjustment for those areas that just didn't have revenue for a year. Let's say it's a year and a half, however long this will last. And so we're able to add those back to EBITDA as well. So those are a couple examples.
It's a really good example. I remember so distinctly, I was in California, right? It was my last business trip as COVID was about to happen, as it turned out. And I kind of knew something was afoot. I'd already given a seminar on COVID, and I grabbed literally the shoulders of a CEO in the agriculture industry, and I said, switch to individual packaging. I promise you've got to do it now. And thankfully they listened and did, but then they're left with a bunch of institutional packaging that, is one of those add backs. And I think that really emphasizes the importance right now of looking at your last year financials to say, okay, so what are the one-time charges that we just have to take? What are the one-time charges that are really add value to our business? And having a good explanation of that, which means it's going to take a little bit more time, I think, to do some of that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
The next topic we have is factors that drive the value of a company up, which is a great list. And I'd like to ask, really primarily, what are the factors that are within the control or influence of the business owners or managers themselves?
Yeah, as I look at this list, Mike, I think some of these are external, like this capital comment, the interest rates. What is in control is the scarcity or the quality of the asset, and that is driven by how unique your business is, what you're doing. Do you have any intellectual property that is just really unique to that company? We talk about it a lot in the ingredient space, as I said, where we spend a lot of time. If you have a unique formulation or a unique way of doing something, that drives scarcity value, and that frankly drives margins often because you're the only company in the world that can do what you do. And I think that ties or is similar to the last bullet point, which is innovation. Companies that are innovating, that are able to be nimble and create products that are in high demand, by their customers, we're often finding, valued, they're ascribed a higher value than the rest of the market.
I think that the idea of intellectual property assets in food and agribusiness is something that might surprise people outside the industry. Literally, one of the heads of our food, beverage, and agribusiness industry group is Bridget Hayden, who's a patent lawyer. an intellectual property expert. So it's really critical, and that strikes me as one of those things that you could do early on, is look at, what is the IP that you might have or could generate by filing a seed patent or license application with the USDA, or, kind of making sure your protections are there, right?
Absolutely. I would say both licensed IP as well as know-how. We often see in the industry, somebody just has a very good formulation or a great way of blending, products or ingredients. And they may not patent that, or they may not, file to protect that know-how, but they certainly within their four walls have an ability to do something really unique. And so I would encourage business owners to think about, again, creating moats around the business that are special to the company.
And if it's know-how, the people who have that know-how, making sure they're well taken care of, and there's going to be an element of transition for a sale for those people, right? That they're a part of the asset in a way that is being sold. And so being mindful, I guess, of that is really important, right?
Absolutely. And we didn't cover it earlier, but we are very supportive of our clients who take care of their teams in a sale. If a business owner owns 100% of the company and they're going to do really well by a sale, making sure that the key managers are taken care of. Again, back to this being an intense process, I think it's helpful to pay, bonuses to the team members that are going to endure an intense 6 to 9 months, both for retention, but to your point, also just to maintain the collaboration of the team. So we think that's a good tool. Yeah.
And then conversely, there are factors that drive the value down. These, can you, first of all, start by, when you say a disorganized process, what do you mean by disorganized?
Yeah, and again, back to your point about self-serving comments. I mean, we work with clients sometimes where we're brought in after they have had discussions with buyers. So they've actually gone down the path of entertaining, a buyer and potentially selling the business. And then they realize it may be helpful to hire that real estate agent to clean up the situation before they actually transact. So again, there's a bit of resident knowledge that we have about what proper financials should look like and how they should be organized. And to your point, some history as well as some forecasted set of numbers. And so we think it's important to, organize the financials, organize the business before you start having conversations. And that's a role that we play. Again, the quality of earnings is also part of that process as well.
Hit the wrong button there, sorry. And then you say financials that are not coherent. What do you mean by not coherent?
Often we find, again, especially with the family-owned business, the entrepreneur-owned business, those that even have the ability to create good financials, and sometimes that's not the case. They're using QuickBooks or what have you. Not very sophisticated financial systems, but they may not be spending the time to make sure the financials are tying together, or that all of the linkages between the financial statements are there. And so again, given, and again, the real estate analogy is a good one here. You want to put your best foot forward right from the beginning, right? To your point, if there's painting to be done or a pre-inspection to be done, you want to make sure that the minute you start to show the home, it's show ready. And similarly in our business, we want to make sure that the financials all tie, that the story is all coherent. If there was an add back, that's considered right out of the gate, and you're not mentioning that 6 months into the discussion, oh gosh, by the way, there was this thing that happened in 2018 or 19, and we want to bring it up now. So you plan all of that in advance of having the discussions, because you really only get one chance to make a good impression.
And you can lose the trustworthiness of the information very quickly. I've observed that happen, it goes very poorly. And for example, if you have a real increase in production need at a certain point, you're going to see an increase in labor costs. Conversely, if you see a drop in production need, you should see a drop in your labor costs. And if there's not, then that's the kind of coherency question, right, that you'd be probably asking.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the participants, Steve, asked some questions about rep and warranty insurance, and specifically kind of geared at the next question I had, which was the operational challenges. So, recalls, environmental issues, and the like. And so can you talk first about what those operational challenges are, and then I'll get to some follow-up questions in regards to the rep and warranty insurance there.
Yeah, specific to the food and beverage industry, and again, each industry has its own concerns, headwinds. We see in our industry often recalls. Product is sent out, there's some issue with the product, it has to be recalled by the company. So that can be, related to operational issues with the business. We also, depending upon the company and what they're doing, we can see environmental topics that come up. We're working with a client right now that had some issues with disposal of chemicals and such. And so, periodically, these are issues that in the food industry, buyers zero in on very quickly. Was there an outbreak of listeria in the facility? And, how was that detected and how is it dealt with? And food safety is a major topic in our industry.
And I would add into that if you have owned real estate as part of the transaction, it increases the cost, increases just getting ready, getting the sale process. That often slows things down, largely for environmental reasons as well.
Yeah.
Now, have you found that insurance is available to kind of either rep and warranty insurance or other insurances that is enough to satisfy the buyers? I mean, is there even coverage around?
So a couple comments. Rep and warranty insurance has evolved significantly. We just worked on a transaction where the carriers were able to put together rep and warranty insurance in 10 days. And that was a process that used to take 4 to 6 weeks. Insurance is available just like it is in personal insurance for almost any topic. We've worked on transactions over the last 12 to 18 months where there were special insurance products available for tax liabilities. We worked on a transaction that we just signed last week where heavy metals in the industry within the product are a concern. And there are insurance products around heavy metals and potential for recalls and potential for litigation. What I would say is the insurance providers are extremely creative at creating products. And then the question is how much that insurance will cost to cover whatever the potential liability is.
I think that's one of those really important questions to be considering early on as well, because you'll want to consult with your experts on the transaction to even get into the right markets and know who the people are who have that expertise within the food industry.
I think that's right.
And then when you say pressure from COVID, what do you mean by that?
Well, gosh, we have seen back to areas or segments of our industry that were maybe disproportionately affected by COVID. We've, Mike, worked with businesses that are 80 to 90% focused on food service. There was a great ingredient company that we knew, very high margin, that was selling specialty ingredients to white tablecloth restaurants. Prior to COVID, it was an amazing high margin business, thriving. COVID came and the business went almost to zero overnight. So, it depends on the company, but we have definitely seen COVID affect businesses, even in positive ways. Some of our companies had pressure from COVID because they were being asked to create more product than their facilities or their labor force was able to manage. And so COVID has in different ways affected the food, beverage and agriculture space.
It was a good time to be in baking yeast, I can tell you that. So you've alluded to most of the topics here, but I want to kind of probe on a handful of the questions. Obviously, the best plan is worthless, until you execute. And as we all know from George Patton, no plan survives the first bullet. So in any event, that means execute and also stay nimble, I would assume. When you talk about show 3 years of success, two questions here. One is why 3 years? And two is what happens, what do I do if I don't have 3 years yet, but the trajectory looks positive?
Yeah, some of these are rules of thumb. I will tell you, we work with great clients that have a year or two of great success and they're ready to sell and it just makes sense to go to market. And so we don't have a 3-year track record, but I would say if it's possible, just like financial products, right? If you were buying a mutual fund, they usually talk about a 3-year track record and that's what they try to impress you with to attract your investment dollars. I think 3 years is a good number, but it isn't absolutely necessary. But it does show a nice trend line. We talked about the proprietary processes. Certainly any factor that differentiates your company is helpful.
And when you say proprietary, what are you referring to there?
Yeah, I would say those are those, areas of know-how, areas of intellectual property. Customers will come to you for a reason, right? You are the company that is able to be nimble and provide products just in time, or you're the company that is able to fulfill better than your competitors. So I think proprietary processes is a pretty broad topic, but it covers manufacturing, it covers culture, it covers your ability to fulfill any of those unique parts of your story that an investment banker like me will highlight in a process.
I was thinking about this particular slide. One of my favorite business books, right up there with the 7 Habits, is one called Getting Past No, which is a book written by the authors of getting to yes, but taking it into the extreme, like, bargaining during a strike, hostage negotiations, that kind of a thing. And so, I'm not a hostage negotiator, but I do a lot of negotiating over a lot of things for a living. And one of the comments that is recommended is that you step to the other side, meaning that you leave your perspective and try and take the perspective on of the other person and look at your situation through that lens. And I think to some degree that's really what I took from this slide in general and even your overall program is kind of step to the side of someone who's got money. You're not the seller of the house, you're the buyer, and you have an investment you want to make. What are the things that you like, and how can we emphasize those things? What are the things you don't like, and how can we, as you say, eliminate or mute those concentrations or problems?
Yeah.
Is that a fair summary?
It's really well said. It's really well said. We work with great entrepreneurs that often, and to your point, we try to take their perspective. Often they're building a business and they're just focused on how do we pay the bills, right? And maybe the business gets elevated to a point where they can think strategically about what type of business do we take on? What type of customers do we take on? What type of products do we sell? But often, we'll meet folks who need a little editing. They need to pare down what they're doing. They don't need to make 50 different types of widgets. They need to make 5 different types of widgets really well. And that's what's attractive to the market if they're thinking about selling. You can certainly have a 50 widget business, but that may be less marketable. And so So these couple bullet points are focused on that. Edit down the business, be really good in a couple specific power alleys, areas that can be sold, and frankly, for which buyers may be seeking expertise in an area. In often when we're selling a business to a strategic, they're looking for somebody who's really good at selling a couple different types of products, and then they'll plug it into their portfolio of businesses or products. They're not looking for a very diverse business. They're looking for somebody who's really deep.
I literally wrote it down, Power Alley. I'm gonna quote you on that. I love it.
I appreciate that.
For those who don't know the difference, what is a strategic or strategic buyer?
So we refer to those that are competitors or other companies. So it could be a public company. It could just be often a large private owned company, not a small one. But somebody that's often in your industry or in an adjacent industry that is looking to buy a business, as compared to or contrasted from a private equity group, which is a fund, a financial buyer, somebody who's looking to invest in your business and then often sells it within a 3 to 5 year period. And again, to your point earlier, that financial buyer universe has grown. There are private equity funds, there are family offices, there are pension funds and endowments. So that universe has changed over time, but those are the financial buyer groups.
Got it. Okay, any final recommendations here before we move to fiduciary duties?
No, this is good.
Just a quick kind of summary from a legal perspective as we're thinking about what happens as you begin this process of the merger and acquisition process. Very early on, things start to shift around as far as your legal obligations are and to whom they might be, and to some degree, what standards are going to be applied. Merger and acquisition activity is, especially among publicly traded companies, but really others as well, often rife with the potential for lawsuits that happen afterwards if the price goes down, or even if the price goes up, but not by as far as one might have thought, et cetera. There's going to be potential for litigation out there. That means a couple things. Number one, if you're a director or officer, you want to make sure that the company has D&O insurance, that insurance is something that's accessible to you. Often that is by way of indemnity agreements with the directors and officers, just to make sure that you have that level of protection. And then typically you want to have the ability to hire the lawyers that you want rather than necessarily the lawyers that the underwriter would recommend to you. And so making sure those elements are there is really important. We talk a lot about the business judgment rule. It does apply to directors that are disinterested and the like. And that's great. It means that there's quite a bit of protection that happens for those executives in the ordinary course of things. However, there can be times where there is a change of control that becomes imminent or conflicts of interest exist, in which case there may be enhanced scrutiny over the topics that are being addressed and over a particular transaction, in particular if there is somebody who has a self-interest in that transaction, which frequently, I'd say, compared to other industries, is more frequent in food, beverages, and agribusiness because you have people who may sit on the board but also are a supplier or use the services of the organization. And so just being aware that your duties shift around and not the duties themselves, but the standard that applies can be different in different situations. So I want to kind of end things out by talking about what are the 4 things that participants can do based on this program and the 5th one that I added. And so can you talk about what you recommend? What can people do literally today based on the recommendations?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So we see the most successful outcomes and frankly, the best experiences for clients with those that have planned in advance. Those that have built, a proper financial system, maybe have hired that auditor if they weren't having audited financials. They've actually gone through back to the building analogy, they've gone through the process of architecting a business that several years from now could be sold. And there is something to be said for managing your business for growth and for profitability and not worrying about a sale process, but having in the back of your mind, these are the steps I can take to set myself up if 2-3 years from now I'm ready to sell, and not letting it drive the outcome, but certainly having that spin in the background.
Just to comment on that, I think that's a good business tip anyway. If let's say that instead of you're going to manage your business to have more growth focused investment rather than retaining the cash, that's a good story. And if it's consistent with your overall business plan anyway, that's the thing that you'd be selling in a year or two. And so regardless of whether you're anticipating the exit, it seems like that's just great advice no matter what, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we tell our clients, even in the midst of a process, they'll call and say, hey, should I do this CapEx project? I would have anyways, but I know we're in the middle of the process. And our answer is always operate the business as if you're going to continue to own it for the next 10 years. Make those decisions even in the midst of discussions with buyers, as if, you continue, to your point, to take growth initiatives and do the right things for the health of the business long term.
It's I go back to the book I referenced a moment ago, Getting Past No. What you're really talking about is build your best alternative to negotiated agreement and keep focused on that during the process itself. Say, listen, if this doesn't work out, we've got a great business plan, we're executing on it, it's something we've planned on, and we'd like to have this transaction happen.
Absolutely.
But if it doesn't, we know the path forward.
Yes.
So number 2 is seek out others who've plowed the path. What do you recommend?
So we, again, having seen best practices, we see clients who have developed relationships with others that have sold their businesses or have board members that have gone through this. We certainly are very good at advising them, but having others who have gone through that emotional experience even is really helpful. And whether it's a YPO organization or just having good connectivity with others that have been there, it's just helpful. They can give you great, informal advice. They can tell you what they went through. Again, I think even the emotional side of these processes can be daunting. And so finding, people like you, your people, is helpful.
So things like vintage groups, young president organizations, similar types of groups. And you don't necessarily need to tell them that you're going through a process to get that advice, and just talk it through.
Exactly.
Then we've talked, quite a bit about number 3, finding the right team for that particular time of life of the organization is really critical. But can you address number 4, and then I'll take number 5 on? What do you mean by identify a wealth management plan?
We have found the right wealth management advisor to be, again, worth a lot in a process. So often these transactions are life-changing. We're talking about folks making, I won't give numbers, but lots of money. It changes the family dynamic. It changes the person's outlook on what they should be doing after selling their business, what have you. A wealth manager is equipped to help them in that next phase. And increasingly, we're spending time, Mike, integrated with wealth managers, because we realize that we are very important for 6 to 9 months, but then we leave and move on to our next project. And that wealth manager will be with, hopefully, our client for the next 20 or 30 years, and with their children and what have you. So there are tax strategies and there are other elements to the wealth management process that are really important in terms of saving money and planning. But there, again, there is also this life cycle that they participate in that we're just not part of as investment bankers. So we think pairing our clients up with the right wealth manager is a really important part of this process.
You know, at Dorsey, we've got a trust company that often serves in that role. And I find myself increasingly talking about the importance of that, because if you're getting the amount of money that is going to survive, you know, the executives or the business owners, understanding how that's going to work is really important, and the implications of it, as you mentioned, on family dynamics are really key. And so then, you know, I'll mention the last one of just a recommendation of reaching out to George at Cascadia or others with the team. I myself have experienced this, of being there as a client representative with presentations made by you and your colleagues. And I've always been really impressed by the wealth of information that's freely shared well before an engagement happens. You know, of just, here's what happens, here's, you know, some experience, some analysis on the industry that's very helpful to understand what the multiples are and what are the factors in those multiples, and you know, just some of the free resources that you have, with no, obviously I hope that if there is a desire to have a transaction that you'd be considered in the mix, but without any kind of you know, correlation there. It's really been helpful to my clients, in some cases deciding, you know, this is really not going to be for us for a while, or other cases saying, yeah, we need to do this, and let's really buckle down. So I do encourage people to reach out to George and the rest of the team. So, okay, terrific. I'll end with just a couple of kind of housekeeping things. First, if you would like to get any CLE credit, then just respond to Michelle Hubble. Her information link is in the details that was sent to you yesterday, and she'll take care of all of that for you. We also have the Cooperative Business Law book, if those are interested, anybody's interested in that. I encourage you to check it out. It's in your materials. And then finally, if you have questions following the presentation, then I highly recommend that you reach out to George, or potentially myself if need be, or others on the Dorsey or Cascadia teams to get additional information. So with that, George, my deepest appreciation for you personally, and also for the work that you've done on behalf of our clients and the other clients of Cascadia as well. So thank you. Thank you also for kicking off this first of a three-part series. Our next process is going to be, our next presentation will be in about 6 weeks. You'll be getting a notice of that, and we'll be focused on the deal timeline and process, with a great analysis from Morgan Helm, who is the Deputy Chair of the Food, Beverages, and Agribusiness Industry at Dorsey. So George, thank you, and to all the participants, thank you as well.
Thank you.